from all around the world. And we encourage parents to bring their toughest questions, their most important questions, so we can help answer them. And today we've got a special interview scheduled, prepared, and I have Geralyn Spiesz, who's here with me. And Geralyn, I'll just start off by saying a few words. And Geralyn, I'll let you probably introduce yourself and tell more of your story. But Geralyn actually has the background of an occupational therapist, but also she is a mom to her son, Lucas. And so I've asked Geralyn to really join us to talk about her experience, both as a mom, but also as someone who helps other families with children with special needs. And because I think her story is powerful and important. And Geralyn also came across the Doman Method when her son Lucas was young, and incorporated a lot of our programs and treatments with Lucas. So I want to ask her questions about her experience, both as a Doman mom, but also other things that she's done to help Lucas and other children. And Geralyn, in addition to being a mom and a therapist, she's also an author. So she wrote a book called Redefining the Reality of Down Syndrome: The Power of an Integrative Mindset. And I love that title. And Geralyn, I'm reading your book right now, and I think it's great.
Thank you.
So Geralyn, could you just start by maybe telling us a bit about your story as a mom of Lucas? Could you just get started there?
Absolutely. So we did not know that Lucas was going to have Down syndrome before he was born. And the moment he was born, I was the first one who saw it. I'm sure the doctors and the nurses saw it, because my room that I was used to with my other boys, that was very jubilant and excited for the new baby, became very quiet. And they handed him to me, and he had great APGAR scores. He was crying loftily. But I looked at him, and his beautiful face let me in on his secret. So that was how we found out Lucas had Down syndrome. And someone might think that an occupational therapist, and I have extensive experience in developmental disabilities, would have been the most prepared person to get this news, but I wasn't. In an instant, everything I knew from my education and the way children with Down syndrome are approached from a therapeutic standpoint, from an expectation standpoint, didn't ring true to me. I knew there was something else. So because Lucas was born in just a regular hospital, our pediatrician wanted to evaluate him at the children's hospital. So we ended up spending a week in that hospital. And back in those days, you didn't have like computers at your fingertips the way we do now. And the nurses had a computer at their station for parents to use. And the one day I went in there, I was looking up all different things about Down syndrome, and I was coming across all the traditional information that I knew, and something popped into my head. I thought to search Down syndrome and potential, and I found the Domans. And I know I've told you this story before. I was blessed to have been able to met your grandfather. And I told him it is the single biggest find that changed my life. It changed Lucas's life. And for a really important reason, it changed my mindset. It took my mind in this limited expectation model of what Down syndrome was and how it was to be progressed and the therapeutic ideas, and it flipped it on top of its head. It's like, you know, the label doesn't matter. The problem is in the brain. So how can we integrate and organize and input to the brain to change this child's life? And that was the beginning of the best 17 years of anything I could have ever imagined.
Yeah, thanks for taking us through that. And I want to say for parents joining, because obviously I'm sure there are parents watching this who have a child with Down syndrome, but there might be children also with other diagnoses as well. maybe autism or developmental delay. And, I want to say, first of all, many children with Down syndrome also receive those diagnoses as well. So there's a lot of crossover in terms of challenges of development. And also many of the same activities and treatments that drive, brain plasticity and development with those children also apply, with children with Down syndrome also apply to these other children. So I'm saying for parents who are watching right now who may not have a child with Down syndrome, I think the things we're going to talk about today very much apply to you and your child as well. So, okay, so very interestingly, Geralyn, so you find out about our program about 17 years ago. Not sure if you're aware of this, but that's basically when I was starting my work. So I was very new to the scene when I met you and we started working together. So I, kind of my story and Lucas's story kind of started around the same, and I guess in a sense, your story kind of all started around the same time. Okay, so you receive a diagnosis of Down syndrome and you find out about the Doman program, and then what happens next?
Well, that is another part to the Doman story that has been hugely impactful and inspiring to me moving forward. I ordered every book I could get my hands on. And at the time, it was What to Do About Your Brain and Your Child. It was the Teach Your Baby to Read. I think Fit Baby, Smart Baby was a little bit later. I didn't have that one right at the beginning, but I got my hands on all of your books and I read them as quickly as I could. And honestly, for the first 4 years of Lucas's life, I didn't come to Philadelphia until Lucas was 4. I did your program that was outlined in those books myself. And I, of course, as an occupational therapist, I had such a leg up on the neurology and the neurodevelopment to begin with. But it was so inspiring that these books were written to empower parents with information they needed to blend with their expert knowledge of their child in order to put together really impactful programs. And so we started, we did go through the early intervention system. And as an occupational therapist, it was kind of funny because they would send therapists to my house and what they were doing was not aligned with what I was now believing in this new mindset. And so I kind of became known as that mom that fired all the therapists. I think Lucas went through 4 OTs in a year. And I was like, you know what? We're just going to do this on our own. So I did, I put together the programs for him until he was 4. And then I thought, you know what, I'm going to go and I'm going to take the parent course at the time. And we're going to begin this in earnest.
Yeah. And what programs, Doman programs, do you feel were most important and impactful for Lucas as he was growing up?
I honestly, the patterning, the whole idea of patterning, as a therapist before Lucas, I probably would have dismissed it as pseudoscience. But once I had Lucas and I started realizing that there is only one way into the brain, and that is the sensory system. And Lucas isn't going to reach that beautiful cross pattern, cross communication any quicker than if I could input that to him. And what is brilliant, and I know that as of late, I've been talking quite a bit about the cerebellum. What is beautiful about patterning is that you are doing it with rhythmicity, timing, and you are bringing that cerebellum coordination along for the ride as you're doing it. It is integrative for reflexes. It's integrative for the sensory system. It is integrative for cerebellar control. And it also is feeding that motor learning, that biofeedback back into the brain. And it was the hardest part of the program to do because you need 3 people. But I found that to be one of the most impactful. And then another component of our program that I wouldn't have gotten anywhere else. We were part of the masking program for respiratory power and, patterning. So those are the two parts of our program that were unique to Doman that I would have never thought to add to have be part of Lucas's pathway.
Yeah. And so and so what specific areas do you feel like masking or the oxygenation program and patterning helped him with?
Well, I'll tell you, I feel like and this is true for all children, but again, specific to babies with Down syndrome, we find that they typically have difficulties with oxygenation when they're little, and then that develops into problems with sleep, all of those things. But and the traditional application is, oxygen. We'll give them, air oxygen. And it was eye-opening to me to realize that this actually was another area that flipped that understanding on its head. Our ability to breathe, the force with which we breathe, everything is a reflex. And that reflex is triggered by levels of CO2 that builds up, and then it triggers us to breathe. And that was what the masking program helped with. And of course, the rest of our program, as soon as he could walk, we started walking for distance. As soon as he could run, we started running for distance. So now all of that aerobic exercise was now working in concert with that masking program to help Lucas develop a really healthy respiratory system. And now, just a little side note, if you don't mind, Spencer.
Yeah, please.
Specifically for children with Down syndrome. So we know on that 21st level, certain genes are overexpressed. And one of those genes is GABA, and GABA tends to slow everything down, which is why, a classic phenotype of a person with Down syndrome, they move slowly. They're a little bit more sedentary. Epigenetically, one of the very best ways to shut down that overexpression is through specific targeted aerobic exercise. It promotes the brain-derived neurotropic factor in the brain, which is the counteraction to the GABA. And so by virtue of your running for distance with frequency, intensity, and duration, in concert with the respiratory program, it is such, it's really a beautiful fit for children specifically with Down syndrome, and definitely for all other children, but specifically to the needs with children Down syndrome. And the same with the patterning, the whole body, you're pulling in visual motor, you're pulling in sensory integration, you're pulling in the cerebellar control, and you're feeding that motor learning, that praxis back into the brain through the integrated sensation. And I feel like it was the foundation for all the rest of it, because we know reductionist skill-based learning isn't effective. It results in motoric movements. It results in poor praxis or motor planning. It needs to be integrated and it needs to be coordinated. And I think that's what the patterning program sets a beautiful foundation for.
Yeah, and I want to talk to you, as we go on with our discussion. I want to come back to the cerebellum because, interestingly, a mom who knows you, who has a child with Down syndrome, recently reached out to me and said, "Hey, Spencer, you really got to look into, the cerebellum even more." And she sent me like a 8-page document, all with research about the cerebellum.
I know who it is.
I'm going to have to read this now. But by the time about half a page in, I realized this is really important, and it started me on a bit of a going down the rabbit hole, let's say, online in kind of researching the cerebellum. I think is it 80% of neurons in the brain, I think.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, so yeah, the cerebellum is only 10% of the total surface area structure of the brain, but it has 80% of the neurons, which is good and bad for kids specifically with Down syndrome because it is significantly impacted. Because of the trisomy, cerebellar hypoplasia is noted as early as the second trimester in utero. We know our baby's cerebellums are not growing. which is why when you have a child who has Down syndrome and autism or any other things, all of these programs are beautiful, but they still have to be respectful of the fact that there is a difference in the brain structure and function by virtue of the trisomy. So phylogenetically, I think I've talked to Doman parents a million times over on our baby's developmental profile when we first started with Doman. Midbrain issues are classically where Down syndrome starts to see patterns, right? And no surprise, because we know that is the first part in the brainstem where that cross pattern first comes online. So the midbrain, phylogenetically, again, develops about 4 to 6 weeks in utero. The next thing to develop is the cerebellum at around 6 to 7 weeks. And then the last thing is the cortex at 8 to 10 weeks. And I love the visual representation of that cerebellum being in the middle of those two critical autonomic nervous system, life-saving functions of the brainstem, and the beautiful, motor, speech centers, sensory centers in the brain. It's in the middle because it is the coordinator. It is the master praxis coordinator. And if you think of our children with Down syndrome as early as, their developmental achievements of the first year, you will see them do things like butt scoot instead of crawl, or you'll see them crawl with one leg sticking out to the side.
Yes.
Their sensory system, which is definitely off as well. So the vestibular, the proprioception, knowing where their legs are in space, knowing how they're moving in space, that's already disordered coming into their brain by virtue of the trisomy. And now we've got a cerebellum that is supposed to be coordinating it all to create the motor pattern for crawling. And so that's when we start to see these maladaptive movement patterns. And I always like to look at what I know as a therapist, for children who are learning to walk, say, with Down syndrome, which is why I think Doman mindset is critical. If your baby gets to be 12, 13 months old and he's not walking yet, the physical therapist is going to come in and say, okay, it's time to start working on walking. And they'll pull the baby up, and the baby cannot bear weight on his legs because proprioceptively, he doesn't even know they exist yet. He's not weight bearing developmentally. He's not gone through the developmental sequence to develop that skill. So they might get the baby up into standing. They might work on walking with a walker or cruising across furniture. And what do we see? We see the baby lock his knees into extension and motorically throw one leg or the other. And that's what results in a classic gait pattern that is not reciprocally, segmented. So this all goes back to everything we do, the patterning for integrating things, the reflex integration, the sensory integration, and what we need for all of those things to work together for good praxis of speech, of ideational praxis, for learning, for reading comprehension, for motoric praxis, is the coordination of the cerebellum. And I'm same as you, Spencer. There's a huge rabbit hole that I've gone down, and not only am I a therapist, but I'm a mom. So Lucas he's undertaken some crazy activities that I've put together in my brain. But I think it is the key specifically to a brain that is developing under the influence of trisomy 21.
Yeah. And yeah, the cerebellum is so interesting. I think some people kind of liken it to the conductor of the orchestra of the brain, because so many different activities are being routed through it, right? So many different functions are being routed through it. And so when I really saw, wow, okay, the cerebellum is important for math ability, for example, or the ability to sequence things in your mind and working memory, those are things that, we've known for a long time are challenges for children with Down syndrome. And if we take math as an example, we, definitely have had huge wins with thousands of children with Down syndrome with our math program. But that being said, different children will respond in different ways. And some children, their math challenges are far more stubborn, let's say, than
Mhm.
other kids. And even with like our kind of, let's say, the typical Doman math program may not be as successful with those kids. And then we have to find other ways of kind of teaching them math, which has been successful. But I think understanding that cerebellar connection with math is very helpful.
Well, just super honest. And before he went to school this morning, I told him I was going to be having this interview, and I got his permission to speak about him, and he's fine with it. So I'm not doing this behind his back. When Lucas was little, I didn't have this perspective. I was putting the pieces together. We did the Doman math program. It was not a program that I was diligent with. That was me back then. I prioritized other things. I wasn't diligent with it. So then we started to homeschool. And I realized that Lucas needed, I called it at the time, a neurodevelopmental approach to his academics. I didn't really know what that meant, but I knew sitting him at a table with a worksheet and a paper and a pencil wasn't going to get the job done. So we did all kinds of things. Learning in general was very easy. Math specifically, we struggled with. So I ran through programs, manipulative programs. I turned everything into a movement experience. So teaching him to jump forward to add on a number line on the ground, jump backward to subtract, trying to encode these ideas. I used elevators to teach positive and negative integers. Lucas is right now 17 years old. He is a sophomore in high school, and he is finishing algebra. He has an 84 average in algebra.
Wow.
However, he cannot tell you what 6 plus 5 is. He cannot tell you what 7 times 3 is. He relies on the calculator. And over his 17 years of this math journey, now a couple years ago, I started to realize that all those foundational pieces, like we think, just like the rest of us, like you learn to do this in first, second, third grade, fourth grade builds onto it, fifth grade builds onto it, and we've got it all. Lucas's functional math that relies on that spatial relationship, that relies on that time dimension thinking, that abstract thought, all those things that are coordinated by the cerebellum are not in place. He can procedurally use that IT 400 whatever calculator to graph the slope of an equation, but he cannot go into the store and figure out how much change he needs back. And I think that is a gap in his learning, because I was kind of late to this party. So we're working on it now. I have ideas on how to do it now. And that's the great news. Traditional thought will have us say, well, your baby is past this window, or your child is past this window. And certainly the traditional education system, by the time a student gets to high school, they're pretty much, this is what they're going to do. The word plateau gets thrown around a lot. With 80% of the neurons, the cerebellum is highly plastic. It is highly responsive to inputs that you give it, and it can organize itself, and it continue to create change. So that's the good news. Doesn't matter how old your child is.
Well, I appreciate everything you said. And first, I want to say that even though he might have those challenges still with arithmetic, the fact he's able to do algebra, which requires memorizing formulas and completing multiple steps to come to an answer, and the fact he can still score 84%, that alone is a testament to his intelligence, because he's obviously had to work around some big challenges there. So that's the first thing. But also, it's a helpful reminder for me, because as you probably know, and I want to talk to you about your experience with the Doman reading program, which I know you did very intensively. But it's a good reminder for me about how not just a cerebellar approach to stimulating the brain is important at a young age, especially for kids with Down syndrome, but also starting math early is also important.
Yes.
And maybe it needs to be started as early as possible. So can you tell us a little bit about your experience with the reading program? Because I know you did that very intensively. You even write about it in your book. Can you talk about that?
I feel like the Domans have given me and Lucas so much, but reading is probably one among the greatest gifts. As a therapist, right, you hear lots of talk like, well, phonics versus sight words, all of this. And I keep trying to impress. The Doman reading method is not sight words. It is mature sensory reading. It is flooding of the sensory system. Just like if you or I were to play a game of hangman, I could get a really long word with only a couple letters in there because my brain recognizes the pattern. That is the intent of the Doman reading method. And when you take a child, specifically now with Down syndrome, but all children, because we know the reading difficulties across the board, here in the United States and, probably beyond that with children who are struggling readers. But specifically for kids with Down syndrome, you are taking a child who has disturbances in their sensory system from the trisomy, visual, motor, sensory input. Your disturbances in the cerebellum now, which are necessary for the smooth coordination, ideation, reading comprehension, all that, and abstract thought. And now you're going to wait until they're 5 years old, and you are going to say, all right, here's the letters. Here's the sounds they make. When you put them together, they make different sounds. You put those together, they make a word, and this word stands for something. And we're expecting our children to learn how to read. And we know the outcomes. We know the statistics. Children with Down syndrome, people with Down syndrome, traditionally have limited reading abilities. Yeah. So when Lucas was little, I was like, the reading program spoke to me. I'm a book nerd. I love reading. Reading and the intelligence programs. People were like, how do you get him to do that? I'm like, this is how we play. He loved it. So I got to work. I made my cards. Lucas was 1 because it's easiest to teach them when they're 1, next easiest when they're 2. I knew this from those books and it rang true to me. So I made all the cards and I got really strategic. I would put a pack in the kitchen, a pack in the bathroom, a pack in the car. And every time he got in and out of the car, he got flashed his cards. And every time he went in and out of the bathroom, flashed his cards. And very soon, I started recognizing the fact, never test, of course, but I was recognizing that Lucas was drawn to these. He loved them. I know classic Doman program says to retire the words, but I never did it. I put it in a huge box in our playroom, and he would pull thousands of cards out every day, and he would run his fingers over the letters. Mm-hmm. And he loved it. And so then we were in the midst of our running program. We weren't doing the respiratory program yet because we didn't start with the institutes till he was 4, but we were starting with the walking program, the crawling program, the break aiding program. We had monkey bars in our living room. We were doing all of these beautiful integration things with the patterning, and now the reading was getting layered on top, and he started to talk. And I noticed that he could say the words he could read. And our children, because of differences in that auditory motor system coordinated again through the cerebellum, sometimes they miss syllables in words. So a word like watermelon, for example, they'll get 3/4 of the word and leave the last syllable off, or they'll start in the middle of the word and they'll miss the first. I would write it out syllabically, watermelon, and I would show it to him, and he would read it, and he got it. And then he could say it. And this reading program, when I say changed our lives, in more ways than I could say, Lucas did get sensory overwhelmed and would love to run off. We were on high alert. He would leave the house and want to run down the street to the playground. And he would, if you open the door in the parking lot, he would be across the parking lot. So I started making notes for him, and I would put them on the door where he would see it, and it would say, before you leave, you have to tell mom or dad. And I would put it on the door, before you leave the car, you have to wait for mom or dad. His ability to read changed everything. Our children, especially our children with Down syndrome, want to be independent and capable. And once they can do something, they want to show you and be proud. So I would give Lucas a blank piece of paper in the morning, and I would ask him how he wanted to structure his day, and we would write it down, and he would come up with everything we did during the day, and then he would follow his agenda. And I used agendas for everything, sequencing for making a recipe or getting dressed. And he loved it. It gave him such control over his life. I can't say enough about the reading program. It honestly changed our life.
Well, thanks for saying that. And by the way, for anyone who's joining us late, we're talking to Geralyn Spiesz, and Geralyn wrote a book called Redefining the Reality of Down Syndrome, The Power of an Integrative Mindset. So Geralyn, I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned you fired, I think, like 4 therapists maybe in the first year with Lucas. Where do you feel so many conventional therapies fail? I mean, you come from a background with occupational therapy. My grandfather came from a physical therapy background. Mm-hmm. Why do you feel the conventional therapies usually don't get good results?
That's an excellent question. And I am so glad that you asked it, because I think the field of occupational therapy is one of the most impactful there can be. Our holistic roots go back to World War I. Our practice was born out of the mental health. My master's research was in mental health with sensory integration and people with schizophrenia. We have so much to offer that is really beautifully aligned with a parent who has a Doman mindset. Things like whole child, whole brain. You've got to co-regulate and bring that brain out of flight or fight before you can learn. You have to have an environment of joy and expectation, because those epigenetic inputs are important. You have to understand the things that go into your program. If you're thinking like, oh, all right, let's get to work. We have to crawl, we have to run, we have to do this. You're not going to get the outcomes that honoring your mothering instinct or your fathering instinct will get you with. This is the best part of being a parent, the joy that I bring, the joy that I receive from watching my child learn and grow. Occupational therapy is all of that. And Jean Ayres, who I believe Jean Ayres back in the 60s worked with your grandfather, Ann Temple Fay, when she was developing her sensory integration protocol at the time. Every OT, as part of their training, is well versed in sensory integration. They were not certified Ayres sensory integration. That's special. That is a separate certificate. But every occupational therapist has a sensory integration background. I think what happens today in early intervention, and I've worked in early intervention, there is a condensing of what we're able to do because of the system constraints. There is a reductionist vision of what OT can provide under a problem-based model. So if your child, Down syndrome is a little bit different because that's known at birth, they're usually better. But if your child is starting to struggle with some things, I can't even come in and see your child until there is a documented problem list. So we're forced in this system to take a look at the child's problem and put together a reductionist problem-based approach and an outcome. As an OT, one of the craziest things to me is when you flip into the preschool, the CPSE model, everything is revolving around preschool education. So OT's role is relegated to fine motor, to handwriting. Mm-hmm. And you'll see, I went in to see this one little girl. She did not have Down syndrome. I was there to do a handwriting eval on her. She's sitting at her desk And every time she'd pick her head up, she'd kick herself back because her STNR was still engaged. She couldn't dissociate the right and left sides of her body from her top and bottom, but I'm somehow supposed to give her this output motor-based intervention to improve her handwriting when the answer is all on that integrative side, integrating visual motor, sensory motor, cerebellar, this rich epigenetic input. So that's where I feel occupational therapy isn't as effective as it could be. I don't believe it's profession. I believe it's constraint of system.
Interesting. Yeah. Thanks for saying that. Well, I want to open things up now to all the parents who are watching. So if you'd like to join and ask any questions, you can. So if you are on Facebook or YouTube or Instagram, you can type your questions into the comments box and we'll answer them. If you're here in StreamYard in the webinar with us, if you turn on your camera, I'll know you want to ask a question. Just turn it on and I'll add you to the webinar and you can ask us in person. So the first comment that we have here, Geralyn, comes from Maud. And Maud is saying that she patterned with her daughter when her daughter was 2. She has also did the oxygenation program. She has autism and ADHD. We saw rapid improvement in her coordination, speech, and motor skills and socializing across the board. We were blown away. We lapsed, and now she's 7. We are restarting the program. The results are not coming in like when she was younger, but we are hoping to see results soon. I would highly recommend these 2 as staples in the Doman program. Thank you, Maud. And so, Geralyn, I mean, you can feel free to, of course, make any comments you want based on Maud's comment. But I'm actually kind of wondering about your experience. You've been going at this a long time with Lucas. I mean, he's 17. What's your advice long term for parents from an emotional standpoint with doing a program like the Doman program, that integrative mindset? There are going to be ups and downs. How do you navigate that emotionally?
I love that question, Spencer, because that's actually part of the mission of the Down Syndrome Action Plan, right? I love dads. I couldn't do any of this without Lucas's dad, my husband, Sean. But I'm going to specifically talk to mothers right now.
Please.
You know, we have lives and careers and relationships and aspirations and educations, and we have this plan for our lives. And we decide to become a mother. And intellectually, we know that you can't predict that path. But I think we assume that our lives are predictable. And then we have the unpredictable. And from that moment on, right now I do early intervention GG Fit classes for infants with Down syndrome through our local Gigi's Playhouse. And I see these moms, they're coming in, babies maybe 6 months, 8 months, 10 months old. And she's got baby in a carrier and she's got probably a toddler in tow and she is ready. You know, she's got her coffee. She wants to learn everything she can. She wants to know everything she can to help her baby. Every question is about the baby. Every question is about what she can do more. And we know as moms, it gets to be about 10 o'clock at night when you finally, you know, get to decompress and we beat ourselves up because it wasn't enough. We didn't do it good enough. We didn't find the right answers. We were exhausted. We had a migraine and this didn't get done. That is so unfair to mothers, to us. During the first 6 years of Lucas's life, that was me. I didn't care how tired I was. I didn't care what it took. I worked. My other boys, I have 2 older sons, they would get on the bus to go to school at 8 o'clock and Lucas and I were on and we worked until 2:45 p.m. when the boys got off the bus. And then I was travel hockey. I was on the school board. I was volunteering. It was everything. And I wouldn't sleep all night long. The anxiety, the guilt, the shame, all of it. I'm up on the computer thinking and figuring out. And this gets us burnt out. It gets us burnt out and it's not sustainable. So part of my mission with the Down Syndrome Action Plan is to help moms specifically and dads navigate this neurodevelopmental, integrative, rich road that is going to change your child's life, and realize that your journeys are overlapping. Your need for those epigenetic things to enjoy your child, to be able to celebrate the wins. As Maud just said, she lapsed. She didn't lapse. It was life. Life got in the way, and that had to take a back seat. But her daughter's 7 and she's starting it up again, starting it up with fresh eyes, with a joy, with honoring your intuition, giving it as a gift. That was something that's impressed me with the Doman Method from day one. You give reading as a gift. You give the intelligence programs as a gift. We give our children the best of ourselves, and we deserve to enjoy our motherhood and to enjoy this process. So working on ways to co-regulate, working on things to weave in some mindfulness to calm our own nervous systems down, things that we can do with our babies and with our children. So it's not his road and our road, it's our road together. I guess that's the best answer I can give you. It's not easy, but if it's any consolation, as you might see from how I'm rambling on, 17 years and we're just getting started. I'm just getting started.
Yeah, it occurred to me as you were talking, when you were talking about how moms often beat themselves up at the end of the day, that if someone else spoke to a mom in the way they speak to themselves, they would hate that person, right? It's like if I came to a mom at the end of the day and said, wow, you only did 8 sessions of this thing instead of the 10, wow, you're such a failure. They would have every right to hate me. And yet they often talk that way to themselves all the time.
And the other unspoken part of that role is, particularly for a child with Down syndrome, we have all these ideas in the back of our heads, and there's some people in our families and our social circles that have very stigmatized thinking around that diagnosis. So we not only are dealing with the regular postpartum, the regular, the post-trauma of finding out your child has Down syndrome, and not only are we putting on our happy face and we've got to engage our brain to help this child, but now we feel the emotional load of making it okay for everybody else. It has to be okay for our other kids. We have to get all this work done, and we can't make our other kids feel like they're missing out. Sometimes we know the statistics on marriages and partnerships after the birth of a child with a diagnosis. We have to make it okay for our partner. We can't and if we're honest, we have to deal with grief, right? The loss of what we thought our life was going to be. And only when we come together as a community. We can't do it alone. I created the Down Syndrome Facebook group 14 years ago. Lucas was 3. It was right before I came to the Institutes. I had only met one other mother. I stalked her. Kristen Morrison, for anyone listening, you'll know exactly who she is. She was like my soulmate. And it's crazy because we're on opposite sides of the globe. But she was my soulmate. I would get up and I'd have a migraine and my back would hurt and I was stressed, and Lucas had his crawling program and his running program and all this. And I would turn on my messenger, and her and Griffin sent me a message of them crawling around and doing stuff. And it was the community that I needed. So I created the Down Syndrome Action Plan, hoping to be that for other mothers and fathers. Beautiful. I don't want to leave them out.
Yeah, no, that's really beautiful. So we have a question here, Geralyn, from Sandra, who's asking, how much time did you dedicate to the Doman program and to occupational therapy?
Oh, okay. So there's the first 6 years of his life, and then after. When I was a Doman family, I found that 8 hours was what I needed. And being on the Doman program, there's many, many, many components. And I never liked the checklist, like, okay, what's the next thing to do? I never liked that. So what I would do is I would try to organize my day within a rhythm. So I knew Lucas was geared towards the reading and the intelligence program. He really loved it. That was how we played. And so I would, we'd get our crawling laps in, and then we would sit together. Again, co-regulation, not across the table from one another. I'd flash them, the cards in front of him. But whenever we were doing the intelligence program, whenever he was always sitting next to me, he was snuggled up with me, that proprioceptive neurocalming input. And then it was time for a snack, and then it was time to go for the run. So what I would say is, although it took me 8 hours, my saving grace was taking it out of checklist form and putting it into rhythm form. What can we do rhythmically through this 8 hours and hit all the things we need? We gotta go to the doctor's office. We gotta go to an appointment. So why not every time I get Lucas in and out of the car, I would flash him the words that were in the car. Every time, when he was in the car, when he got older, I used to play this game and I loved it. I would put back then an audio CD from the library, like an audio book on in the car. And as we were driving, I had the hand control. I'd turn it off and I would ask him, I'd be like, what color was the little boy's sweater? Where did he go? So I would turn our drives into like this auditory listening thing. He used to love Magic Tree House. So I would get Jack and Annie stories and I would play them in the car. Or, we've got to go to Noah's soccer game and, there's a game going on before and there's a big hill. So we're going to go and we're going to do the hill, or wrapping your goals within the rhythm of your life is what I ultimately found to be my saving grace.
Thank you. That is a great answer. I'm going to add Colleen Hudson. Hi, Colleen.
Hi.
Hi, Colleen.
Hi, Geralyn. Good to see you.
It's nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too.
So, Colleen is our representative here in the US and in Europe, and is the first person to speak to our families on the phone when they want to learn more. And so, Colleen, I wanted to add you for this question, although let's get Geralyn's thoughts first. So this is on Instagram. Diamondo asks, I have a son with Down syndrome who is almost 5 and nonverbal. I want to know more about the Doman Method, please. So I'm just wondering, Geralyn, what do you tell, what is your answer for parents when they're asking specifically about our program? What do you tell them who are new?
There was an edict that I learned from your grandfather in his original set of books all those years ago that says 3 miles walking equals talking. For years, I latched onto that as like a rule, like there was going to be some magic beam go off. And once we hit that 3 mile mark, he was going to start talking. Well, I actually found it happened closer to 2 miles, but we won't dispute that. But the question for me became why, right? Because we know our kids struggle with speech. And in fact, I will definitely answer the question, but in fact, Lucas now at 17 is developing different glitches in his speech that he never had. And I think I think there's integrative things that need to be picked up again post-puberty. I think that whole thing. But
yeah, puberty can be a tough period.
Yes, yeah. There's a lot of reintegration that needs to happen after that hormonal chaos. Yeah. But as it pertains to developing speech, right, there's a tendency for our children to be labeled apraxic, as if that's some sort of a diagnosis unto itself. Apraxia is a label. It is actually an adjective without praxis, without motor plan, right? So when we talk about praxis and motor planning, there's all different kinds. There's praxis of intention. So I have an idea here and I want to speak it. There's one praxis of speech. There's the motoric praxis of speech at the speech center. If we look at speech as an isolated silo, it remains elusive. Only when we see that speech is at the top of the mountain of integration, we have to have reflexes, our sensory motor system. We have to have the coordination of the cerebellum. We have to have strong cross communications interhemispherically. We have to have all that in place before our children can verbally speak. And it's a lot of integration. And if you're doing it with traditional methods, 2 times a week for 45 minutes, a therapist comes, you're not going to get there. It is frequency, intensity, duration, right? So even when you're not programming, I work with the parents who call me for advice. I suggest to them that they turn their home into an epigenetic input. You know, when that baby is ready to get up on all fours and start crawling, throw cushions and pillows and blankets in his way. So now he's strengthening his hips in the right position to go over things instead of the same old challenges. Being smart with the things we put in our child's way, the patterning, the brachiating, which brings the visual motor system up into the 3rd dimension, which helps with the vestibular system and all the vestibular ocular reflexes, which are necessary for reading and comprehension and speech. Integrating. And I think that's where the Doman program is phenomenal, because if you do the running, the crawling, the creeping, whatever it is you're doing with the intensity, the frequency, and the duration, that is what's hitting that speech center over and over and over and over and over for motoric speech.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. Colleen, do you mind just saying if this parent wants to learn more, how they can reach out to you?
Yes, please. My phone number is 1-814-232-8668. You can message me there on WhatsApp, or you can call me. And my email address is info, I-N-F-O, @domaninternational.org. You can also always send us a direct message through Instagram or Facebook, because I look at all of those as well. But we would really love to have you come and see us. So yeah, message me, get in touch with me, and we'll talk about it. All right.
Yeah, and I see Maud has commented for you, Geralyn. She's just thanking you for putting into words what she couldn't, and thanking you for sharing your story.
Maud, please feel free. You can find me very easily. Reach out anytime. And there's a lot of new projects that the Down Syndrome Action Plan is working on, focused on mothers and this road, because we always use the analogy of put your mask on first. Logically, we know it. We never do it. Never do it. And it's our mission to celebrate moms and move us all forward together.
Geralyn, I was talking to a mom recently, and I started to talk to her about self-care, because I could see she was really worn down. And she said, "Oh, Spencer, I put time aside for self-care. I'm going to the dentist this week." That was her idea of self-care. I mean, going to the dentist is a form of self-care. Like, taking care of your body is important. But I just thought that was funny. That was, the pinnacle of.
I used to think grocery shopping was self-care, because I would buy a coffee at the cafe, like coming out of Wegmans, and I would sit in my car and drink coffee for like 10 minutes. And that was like my break, my relax.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and coffee for me definitely can have a therapeutic effect, for sure. How can parents learn more about the Down Syndrome Action Plan?
I have a website. It is dsactionplan.com. You can find us on Facebook. Because we talk about our children specifically, it is a private Facebook, but you can find it if you know to look for it. So just search the Down Syndrome Action Plan and request to become a member, and it's that simple. I now do have a Down syndrome.
Sorry to interrupt you, Geralyn. Did I write the correct website there below?
That's exactly right.
dsactionplan.com? Is
Yep,
that correct?
that's
Okay.
perfect. We also now have a community. Every month, I do a webinar. Some of the top, and they're all Down syndrome specific. So we talk about different things like sensory integration, neurodevelopment. One of the things, if you have a child with Down syndrome, it drives me crazy, is that the first year of life, the milestones are very much what and when we should be focused on the how and why and the dynamic. How are they getting in and out of sitting? How are they getting in and out of crawling? And really supporting moms, because we all want our babies to stand up and run across the floor. It's really part of our just deepest desires. But sometimes we have to wait another 6 months for them to install all the integration so that when they do stand up and run across the floor, it is with that perfect developmental foundation. They're integrated, they're using proper praxis. We do webinars every month, and we have interviews. Spencer and Melissa have both been interviews in there. And we really try to bring in thought from both within the realm of Down syndrome and outside. One of the things we're talking about now is the role of mindset, mindfulness, meditation on co-regulating both mom and child, and how you can do it while doing a program and getting all of your goals checked.
Yeah, I'd love to have you again, Geralyn. Unfortunately, we're about out of time, but I'd love to have you on to talk more about epigenetics, because that's been mentioned a few times, but we haven't really gotten to delve into that. And kind of a cerebellar approach. But also, I love what you just said about meditation and the kind of I think you said co-regulation of parent and child, and how that can be helpful. So I'd love to talk to you about those things.
Oh, I would be happy to come back anytime.
Yeah, they need their own hour. Geralyn, I'll finish off with one last question. It's the same question I ask anyone I interview. Can you tell me about one child with special needs who changed your life or changed your outlook on life? And because we spoke about so much about Lucas today, and we know he's changed your life, do you have any other children or adults who changed your life?
I am so glad you asked this question, because just as the Domans changed my life with Lucas, this person changed my life forever, and I didn't even realize it. I was 20 years old. I needed to get a good job in order to pay for college. And I took a job at a new group home that was opening in a town near me. And back in those days, it was the deinstitutionalization. So it was a house where all the residents moving in were either, at home with parents with limited interaction, or coming from an institution. And a gentleman, the first person I ever knew with Down syndrome, before the house opened, we had, as the staff, had to learn their files, what to expect, what their medications were, all of these things. And this gentleman was nonverbal. He had all of these behavior problems, all of these things. And he drove up, and in the car with him was his 94-year-old mother, who was still his caretaker. He was at home with her. And she was sobbing, because in her mind, I know in that moment now what she was thinking. I'm abandoning my child. And here we are, a bunch of college kids, very green, but very hopeful and idealistic, and wanting to learn and change. And he wouldn't get out of the car. And I remember reading, he loved coffee. So I went and got him a cup of coffee, and I brought it out to him, and he came out and he hugged me, and he told me, "I love you, my friend." And honestly, he became family to me. I spent Christmases in hospitals with him when he had pneumonia, because his mother couldn't be there. And I learned from a very young age that what the world tells you about what a person can do and what they know and who they are is wrong. I often wonder what I'm going to cry. I often wonder what his life could have been like if the Domans or programs like that or any of these approaches were available to his mother all those years before. I didn't know it at the time, but he opened my heart and my mind to Lucas that was still decades away. So that's the person that changed my life. And he actually is in the dedication of my book. So
No, that's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure it meant a lot to him and to his mom that you could be there with him. It reminds me, I'll finish off with just one last story. My grandfather used to tell this story about a young man who was on our program. Now, this young man had cerebral palsy, was incredibly spastic. And even though the Doman program helped him greatly from an intellectual standpoint, unfortunately, we weren't able to get him very mobile. And his parents had both died in an accident. And so it was his grandparents who did the program with him. And they were, in their 70s and 80s. And my grandfather was bringing a guest around the clinic, someone kind of visiting, and this family happened to be there. And the grandfather, who was 80 years old or something, would take this grown grandson and literally toss him over his shoulder, probably 150 pounds, and carry him around over his shoulder. And this guest happened to be observing all of this. And the guest said to my grandfather, "Oh, isn't that young man lucky? He has his grandparents there to keep him alive." And my grandfather said, no, he's keeping them alive, because now they've got a purpose. So I just think about that 94-year-old mom, and how long she kept going because he needed her.
Yeah.
But that's beautiful that you were able to be there for him.
I'm grateful to the experience every day. When I left that job after I graduated, my first job was in the day treatment center for individuals with developmental disabilities. And that gentleman attended that day treatment center. And oh my gosh, I don't think he ever went to group. He was down in my office with a cup of coffee and we would have our chats, and just the depth of things that were inside of him that would have never shown up on a chart on anybody's radar.
Yeah. Well, I told Geralyn at the start of this interview I would take 50 minutes, and of course I went over time, but it was too good a conversation. Geralyn, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the invitation, Spencer, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon in one way or another.
Yeah, exactly. And I do recommend all of you watching, I do recommend Geralyn's book, Redefining the Reality of Down Syndrome. It's available on Amazon. And check out Geralyn's work.
Thanks, everyone.
Sure. Thank you, Geralyn. Have a great rest of your week.
Bye, Colleen.
Bye.